Are we personal injury lawyers the bad guys? Are we responsible for all the frivolous litigation that happens in Florida, in the United States, and in other countries that have a tort system like we do? And the answer to that question may surprise you coming from a personal injury lawyer. So there's really a lot to unpack in a question like that, because you really have to take it all the way back to just the basics of definitions. What is a frivolous lawsuit? Like when somebody says, oh, this lawsuit was frivolous, what does that mean? It really depends on who's saying it. If an insurance company is saying that the lawsuit is frivolous, then it almost often means that they don't think they should pay for the injuries that were caused because of, their own parameters. So they think, oh, the evidence is weak. Meanwhile, they went to a jury and the jury determined that the evidence was good enough, that the evidence was strong enough, that they were responsible. So in their opinion, it was frivolous, but yet we had 6 or 12 members of the community, depending on the jurisdiction, that looked at the evidence and determined that it was not frivolous, that it in fact was warranted that the case be brought. And so when somebody says it's a case frivolous, it really depends on who's saying it. And then there's injury lawyers that think no case is frivolous. There's injury lawyers that will bring cases that frankly we in our firm will never even touch, like it wouldn't even make it past our intake process because our standards tend to be higher. And so if you listen to injury lawyers, then maybe nothing's frivolous, right? So nobody's responsible. And so it really just depends on where you're getting it from, like who's saying it, right? But if you really go all the way back, the responsibility for frivolous lawsuits really comes down to people who bring them. Meaning we as injury lawyers, we are an extension of the people in our communities. And so if we have people who are not injured, who are just looking to make a buck, who come to a lawyer and they tell that lawyer a story, they lie to that lawyer, which unfortunately happens, and they tell the lawyer things that are not true, and the lawyer in good faith believes the client, the lawyer thinks, oh, this person's actually injured, let me do the best that I can to help him out, then that lawyer will bring what is a frivolous lawsuit, even though they intentionally are not doing that, even though they think that this is actually a legitimate case, a legitimate lawsuit. And so in that scenario, the frivolous lawsuit is brought by the person really that came to the lawyer and lied to the lawyer. And often what happens is somewhere in the litigation, the lawyer realizes that this lawsuit is frivolous. Like they realize the evidence comes out, it's not what the client was saying happened, it disproves the client's version of events. And in that case, an honest, ethical injury lawyer should get out of the case. Essentially should have a conversation with the client that tells, hey man, you lied to me, this is not what happened, this is not what we had in mind, so we're going to shut this case down. We're going to get out of the case. I'm not going to take this case to a jury basically knowing that this is not accurate, this is not true, that this is a false injury case. And the reason for that, the importance of that, is that every time a person pretends to be injured and brings what is essentially a fake injury case, it makes it that much harder for people who are actually legitimately injured to get justice. Because any frivolous case that makes it to a jury, it's going to affect that jury's view of really all injury cases in that community. And the jury is essentially the community. And so those 6 or 12 people are going to go back to their families and they're going to tell their families about how they just sat on the case where there was a guy who was pretending to be injured and he wasn't. And there was a lawyer presenting that case to them, even though it's pretty clear that the guy wasn't injured. And so in that scenario, it affects everybody that's actually injured. It affects everybody who really will have a claim, but then that community is thinking that these cases are fraudulent or fake and they don't give it the attention that they deserve. And so then the question becomes ultimately, if there are frivolous lawsuits out there, who's responsible? And really that just depends on who you ask. Is it the client? Is it the insurance company? Because the frivolous lawsuit is not really a frivolous lawsuit. They've determined it to be so, even though the evidence supports that it's a legitimate lawsuit. Or is it the lawyer that takes the case, whether they know it or don't know that it's a frivolous lawsuit, and moves it forward? And that's a debate that I don't think is ever going to be settled. And I think depending on who you ask, you're going to get a different answer, because depending on who you ask, they're going to give you the answer that supports their position and that advances their position. And so if you listen to the insurance companies, the lawyers are the bad guys. If you listen to the lawyers, the insurance company is the bad guy. If you listen to the client, then, depending on whether they're a legitimate client or there's somebody who brought a fake lawsuit, they'll have different answers. And so I don't know what the answer is. And I've been practicing personal injury law for a long time and helping a lot of injured clients for a long time. But there's definitely a debate that needs to be had. And it's definitely something that you got to think about as a person, because unfortunately there's a lot of money being invested by companies whose goal and whose interest is that you as a potential juror start believing that every injury case is fake and that you should give up your rights in the event that you are injured to get what you deserve, because there's a rampant amount of fraudulent lawsuits or frivolous lawsuits. That's likely not really the case.